Hello folks, welcome to my YouTube channel, Watercolor Impressions. This week we're going to take a downtown scene and we're going to copy an artist style and we're going to come up with our own painting. Before you go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. Coming up with your own style for new artists can be quite daunting, as well as people who have been painting for years. And still I'm trying to figure out my style. So sometimes I try to copy artists who have their proficient brush strokes or their style. So today I'm copying this artist called Chen Chuang, and hopefully I'm saying his name right. Credit to that artist. So the first thing I noticed about this artist is he's using a lot of dry brush technique and a little bit of wet on top of it. And he also simplified the scene in such a way that everything has a one single shape. And I really like that style. So I want to implement that style into my own style of painting. So this is my reference. I'm going to use this style, and when you do this kind of painting, you can also use your own reference, or also you can copy the exact thing from them. So how it works is he's using a lot of dry brush technique. So he's using not like first wash or second wash. He's been using directly on it. Being said that, I want to make sure that I'm getting my first wash properly. So the first wash are nothing but the lights in our scene. You can see even though the lights are pinkish, but I'm going to add a red light because there's also a red light which is also reflecting on the foreground. I thought it would be good foil for it. So I started with the background building. For the background building, and I have a little bit darker because I made the sky a little bit darker. So I'm going to make sure that you could see it's a one single conference stroke, and I'm also jumping onto the next building, and I'm also making sure to combine it, and because it's going to be like a one single shape. And before it dries out, I'm going to introduce the darker shape. As you can see in his reference, he's combining everything as one single shape. So that's one of his technique, and he's also putting the details before getting drying out. For example, the background building, which is at the background, it's a white building. So I put the white building with a single brush stroke. Before it dries out, I'm going to introduce a little bit of details on top of it. You can see, and there is no first wash or second wash, and you're putting the value as you see in the reference. So I'm putting the blue building, and I'm also making sure it merges at the bottom as well. And before it dries out, I'll combine it as well. This building, you can see I'm putting the wash with the value in it. I'm using a neutral tint, a little bit of cerulean blue in it, and a little bit of white paint in it. And before it dries out, I'm going to introduce this is the wet on wet he is using. So I'm putting the wet on wet on the details on top of it. So this also gives the dry brush as well as wet on wet together. And I'm also trying to combine that shape with my lights on the foreground. And you can see this exact building, which is also sitting on the midground. I'm using a dry brush, using burnt amber, a little bit of white paint in it. I'm also combining that shape with the other shape as well. So if you see the painting, if you see the reference, he's doing the exact same thing, combining everything as a single shape. He's not thinking about everything as each individual buildings. Instead, he's doing it as one whole shape. And this is why I really like the style. So I'm trying to learn from it. Next time when I paint, I try to think everything as a shape instead of each individual shapes. So I'm spending more time on the foreground, and that's my focal point. So the rest of them are just angles, or which are in the background. That's going to act as a lead-in for us, or act as performers for our painting. And the main stage and the main actors are in the foreground. And you can see that's where I'm trying to create a lot of contrast. I'm also making my colors vibrant in that focal point as well. And I'm also adding some street lights using cadmium yellow in it. I don't talk about colors that much. In the recent years of painting, I realized that every artist sees colors differently than each person. So in order to become good with colors, you paint a lot and you come up with your own style of color palette and own style of color as well. When I started painting back in 3 years ago, I was scared of colors, but as I started painting, I usually came up with my own palette as well. So I'm adding the figures, and since I said the foreground would be my focal point, I'm making sure I'm putting a lot of details in that area than the rest of the painting. And you can see the other background, the midground, I painted really quick, whereas in the foreground I'm spending more time on it. So now I'm blocking the cars. I can't leave it as it is because I want to make sure that even my stage which is sitting there also works as well. You can see I'm also using a dry brush technique. You can see the strokes are really confident and it also comes vertical. I also wet the paper in the midground so the values get a little bit lighter because it also creates that glow from midground to the foreground. Because the foreground purpose is to lead us into the painting. And this is the exact same thing. If you can see in the reference, in the foreground there's a lot of blue spills on the right hand side, on the left hand side. So I'm trying to capture that the blue spill from the sky reflecting on the road, and it also gives that reddish road in the foreground. And you can also see towards the rightmost, it is also raw amber. So I'm using a little bit of raw amber, a little bit of white paint, and a little bit of neutral tint in it. And you can see I also added the reflections for the people who are in the foreground as well. I'm just darkening up the foreground a little bit because I want this little bit of depth and distance in my painting as well. And you can see in a couple of seconds, in a couple of minutes, we can end up with this painting. So now I'm trying to reflecting the objects which are in the foreground and trying to bring that to the foreground reflections as well. And this is like a cleanup in the foreground because, as I said, my foreground is my focal point, but rest of the area is going to act as a lead-in or stand-in for us. So I'm trying to add those tertiary details now. So whenever you paint or whenever any kind of painting you do, you always start with the primary details, secondary details, and tertiary details. That way you can block in by shape. So now I'm using white paint, and white paint is quite necessary sometimes. In all painting I do, I use white paint because it's really hard to leave eyelets when you paint. Sometimes these kind of eyelets also will save the painting, and it also creates that a little bit of contrast in your painting as well. And it is also necessary sometimes put these eyelets where there's a lot of contrast. What I mean by is, if you put on where there's a darkest area, it will read better than if you put on the lighter area, because watercolors tend to go really dull after the first wash or after the first time you applied the painting. So now what I'm doing is I'm adding those red spots in my painting as well. You can see there's a car in the foreground. I also added. You can also see it in the reference. I also brought a little bit in the front because that red light reflecting on the foreground is also really good. And I'm also reflecting on the green light, which is also, even though it's like Viridian green light, but I also changed it into a cooler green light as well. So we are almost adding the tertiary details now. These are like street wires, street poles, whatever you name it. These are tertiary details. I will keep it till the end to bring back a little bit of details. So now it's your turn. Take my drawing template and reference, and let's see what you can come up with. And whenever I paint, I always tape my paintings. This is just to give this crisp art edges on my paintings, and this also will help me to know how my painting gonna look like, and this also make the painting come alive, and it's not bad, it came out pretty good. Thanks again for watching this how to come up with your own style of painting video tutorial with me. Let me know what you guys think about this video in the comment section. If you want me to cover any of the subjects in watercolors, write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com or comment below. Before you go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And please share with your friends and family. And good luck with your painting, folks.